All right, hello everyone, and welcome to an episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And for my very special guest today, I have none other than Sam from the channel iSamwise. Hello, Sam. How are you?
Hey Philip, I'm doing great. I'm honored to be here. I've been watching Dear Doctor Fantasy for many years, so this is exciting to be here and be in this room where Mark Lawrence has been and P.L. Stewart and
Yeah,
Joanna and Alan, all these people. So
some very cool people. Yeah. I mean, we were lucky in this community to have so many really wonderful people to interact with. And I'll probably never get to talk to everyone that I want to talk to, but I am glad that you're here today for
well,
me to
thank you.
chat with. Yeah, we actually talked for quite a while already. We should have hit record like 15 minutes ago because we just got into a conversation, everybody, which no one will ever hear, but maybe we'll repeat ourselves.
That's all right.
We were talking Malazan, which I think is going to be I'm predicting it right now. Okay, I didn't say this before, but I'm predicting right now it's going to be one of your top three favorite series of all time. Boom!
Wow, you
Boom!
heard it here first. That's quite the declaration.
Coming from the like Mr. Malazan guy here. No, I do love that series so much. When I say Malazan, I do mean not only the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but I mean the extended Malazan universe, all the
Hmm.
stuff that Erickson and Esselmont have both contributed to that world. But I just think that yeah, of all the people I've interacted with here who you haven't read Malazan yet, which is sort of shocking to me in a way. But with your predilection toward literary analysis and thinking and enjoying something with a little complexity,
Hmm.
I think you're gonna dig Malazan, man.
I can't wait to give Gardens of the Moon 1 star on Goodreads.
The thing is, you can give it 1 star. I will have no problem with that. And then you'll finish the series, and then you'll reread Gardens of the Moon, and you'll revise that 1 star
Hmm.
into a 5 stars.
Yeah, that's right. That's what they say. No, I've read the first like 20 pages of Gardens of the Moon probably like twice now, just to be
Okay.
like, all right, everybody says this is so con like, can I even get a handle on this? And I liked what I read, and it
Yeah,
seemed doable. So
yeah. It's
that gave
doable.
me some amount of confidence.
Yeah, no, the whole it's not like you have to be a rocket scientist to read Malazan. There's just so many ways you can enjoy that series. If even if you want to just read it for the like my good friend Iskar Jarek always said, the lasers and the fireballs. Um, you can read it for that. It's there,
Hmm.
right? I mean, there's all kinds of explosive action and stuff in there, but there's a lot more to it than that as well.
Hmm.
And those are the parts I think you're actually going to really enjoy as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what you make of it. Do you know when you're going to start Malazan? Have you committed to a certain time?
I haven't committed to a start time. So at the end of last year, I kind of made like here's my expectations for this year and things that I'd like to get to. And for like top books that I wanted to get to, like Gardens of the Moon was number one on the list of like I always want to dip my foot in. And so that hasn't happened yet, and we're over the halfway mark in 2025 when we're recording this. So
Yeah.
I expect it to be in the last half of this year, maybe in the last quarter. But it's still on the plan. It's still going to happen at some point this year. So,
All right.
um,
I like it. In the meantime, though, you're reading this little series called The Second Apocalypse, right?
yeah, just let's see here. Finished up Judging Eye about a month ago.
Okay.
So if we have space this month, we'll get to White Luck Warrior. If not, then it'll be next month. So,
All right, I want to talk about it a little bit because I felt that the first two books in Aspect Emperor were peak Baker,
hmm,
Judging Eye, and it's the White Luck Warrior that follows it.
hmm,
For me, in my experience of the series, and I only read it once, but those two books were like, whoa, this is as much as I did really enjoy. Is enjoy the right word with Baker? You know? But as much as he impressed me deeply
yeah,
in initial trilogy, the Prince of Nothing trilogy, I felt like the first two books in Aspect Emperor were like, wow, and then
hmm,
the last two books, which were like what? It's Baker at his most Baker-esque,
yeah.
last two books. I mean, he just Baker unhinged, if you will. So for me, the first two were like just wow, this is really, and there's a lot of Tolkien
Hmm.
subversion going on,
Hmm.
as you just found out if you
Yep.
read The Judging Eye, right? So what do you think? What's your assessment thus far? You're four books into the Second Apocalypse series. How
Yeah.
are you feeling about it?
Well, they say the last two books, like Baker, like had publisher issues and didn't even have an editor on those last two, is what I've heard.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, wow, I don't even know what that's gonna be like. Um, but
Yeah.
as far as the four that I've read so far, it's interesting, you know. There's a lot about what he does and the stuff that he plays with that is like right up my alley. And yet what he's presenting is like and what he's trying to get across, I think, is a worldview that um I don't mind thinking about it and I don't mind
Right.
exploring his ideas, but I think ultimately is something that I don't fully fall on the same side as he does, at least not yet. We haven't
Right.
reached the end, so who knows. But having said that, The Warrior Prophet, which is book two of Prince of Nothing, um,
Mm.
it's still been my favorite.
Mm.
Warrior
Mm.
Prophet, I think, has elevated the whole series for me. That I don't know if I'd put it in my top 10 fantasy books that I've ever read, but it's probably in the top 15 in terms
Okay.
of quality or just like an experience of like what a fantasy novel can be. The way it can make you, it can be so detached from the real world, but also make you think about things so much more.
Oh,
So
so much, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, so
Baker's
that
one of the
one.
best at provoking thought, I think, among the
And
fantasy writers I've read. Yeah.
And for as unlikable as he is, so I guess he's sort of the main character of Prince of Nothing, and Asarim Kellis, for as unlikable as he can be, is still my favorite character just because it's so fascinating to just be like, all right,
Yeah.
what's he gonna do next? And the Warrior Prophet is just the Kellis show through and through. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I like that. That's still my high point of the series. Yeah.
Yeah, he might be the character about which I feel the most conflicted in literature. I mean,
Mm,
he is fascinating, and I think mostly I abhor him. But I find myself rooting for him at the same
hmm.
time, all the time, like almost all the time, not always. Now, certain characters he'll interact with where I'm like, "Ew, watch out for him," you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's fascinating, a really interesting creation on Baker's part, and of course so subversive in so many
Hmm.
ways. Like the no, he's not the first to subvert the chosen one trope.
Hmm.
This might be one of the most interesting subversions I've seen of it, really. So yeah,
Because
very cynical, maybe.
yeah.
I think presentation of the chosen one and just about everything about him, but fascinating, really
Hmm.
fascinating. And so when you said talk about the worldview that Baker is exploring, or
Hmm.
I don't think he it's not like a sledgehammer he's putting on the reader or something like that, but nevertheless I think there's a fairly consistent, even in the title, the darkness that comes before.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a spoiler. um what it implies is what comes before us, or what comes before us is darkness. We don't know, there's so much we don't know about the way we interact in the world, the strings that are attached to us, the things that make us do what we do.
Right.
We're ignorant of all this to the degree that we think we have free will. We think we're acting on our own when we're doing things, but really there are things that are acting upon us that we're not even aware of. The
Hmm.
darkness that comes before, right? These are the things that have preceded you, whether it be your biology or the culture around you or what have you. There are heavy influences that you don't even understand that
Hmm.
are dictating your behavior and your decisions in the world. And this is something that I wrestle with a lot. I certainly feel, especially as you get older and you
Hmm.
recognize your life patterns. And you think, wow, I'm not as original as I thought, actually. I'm not so different or unique, really, am I?
Yeah.
You know? So is that what you're talking about when you're thinking, I'm not really with him here? Or what is there something else you're referring to?
Yeah, I suppose as far as the free will argument goes, I guess it depends on how far somebody takes it Because with what you described there, I think I agree with that. I mean, I'm a young father, and the number of times that I hear the voice of my dad coming
Oh
out of
my
my
goodness.
mouth, and I'm
You
sure that
you
only gets
you've
worse.
started mutating into your father, in other words.
Right, it's like how did that happen? Um, so there definitely is that. I think that what Baker's doing though works. I don't know how to say this because I don't want it to come across like I'm insulting him as a craftsman or as an author because I think he does something very intentionally and he does it well. But I think he does what his books are better as a work better as a thought experiment more
Mm.
so than a reflection of reality. So like one of the things that I talked about, and I just had a video that I made on this point, and
Yeah,
it's
let's
kind of
plug it.
all
Let's
over the
plug the
place.
video. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place, but one of the points that I brought up in that, so apologies if people have heard this already, but it's like there's no like happy shepherds in Baker's world. There's no like where's the guy who goes out and he builds chairs and tables and then comes home and feeds his wife and kids. Um, all traces of normal life or something that you could see as like a virtuous life is almost systematically cut out of the story.
Yeah.
And you take somebody who's considered one of the morally gray characters from George Martin, like Jaime Lannister, and in Baker's world, he'd be the paragon of virtue. Um, so I
Yes.
think I think that's more where I take issue with him is it seems like he very deliberately chooses to not look at any of that. And once again, as a thought experiment, to write a series that way, I think is interesting. I just don't know that it's a fully accurate view of the totality of the world, if you
But your
will.
contention is there's something missing from this vision, and which is fine. This is what he's wanting to concentrate
Mhm.
on. This is his focus. This is his what he's exploring. But if you're looking for a total view of humanity, you think there's something missing from that vision.
I think that's about right, because if you're looking at something, if you're doing a character study, say if you were to write a book about Jeffrey Dahmer, or take a fantasy example, something like Prince of Thorns, where it's a hyper focused look on one extreme person. Like
Hmm.
that's one thing, but that's not what Baker's doing. There's a full world, multiple different cultures and multiple different countries, and a vast array of hundreds of characters that he's that we're encountering.
Hmm.
And so it's not just let's look at one specific highly damaged, nihilistic, troubled person. It's almost everybody reads that way to a point. So I
Yeah.
think you're right. That's more of my thought there. Which I don't know. I'm not done with the series yet, but so far that's been the one thing that has kind of uh, maybe been a burr under the saddle, and it's worth wrestling with. But that's been it.
I'll be curious what you think. I mean, because I think that things do shift somewhat in Aspect Emperor from
Hmm.
where Baker was in Prince of Nothing. It's ambiguous, of course. It's Baker, right? He's not going to give clear answers.
Yeah.
Which another thing, by the way, I really respect about him is that he's not a fan of certainty.
Hmm.
That I kind of agree with him there. There's a certain humility in not knowing if your answer is the correct one, right?
Hmm.
But I think there is a degree to which you could read Aspect Emperor as a continuation of what you've already experienced and
Hmm.
his worldview and etc. But I think there are certain characters, I'm not going to name them because that would be spoilery, but there are certain characters you could possibly analyze and see as representing maybe some of that other side of humanity that you might not be seeing yet. And
Okay.
there may be, I don't actually read it that way, but I know people do. But there may be some characters where you see a little more altruism, compassion,
Hmm.
maybe. Yeah, maybe. It's Baker. So he has a tendency, though, for me, because I'm looking for that. I love compassion in storytelling,
Yeah.
and I'm looking for it actively, and I'll see, oh, is this the moment when Baker actually shows that compassion is okay, it's real, and then it just sort of gets crushed. That's what happens in Second Apocalypse again and again and again for me anyway. Is I feel like, oh, maybe he's actually showing us that compassion is a really important part of this whole picture, and then you know. something will happen to the uh yeah. And then we're back to that kind of very bleak, I view it in some ways as absurdism, really.
Hmm.
Because not only are we talked about this in our discussion on your channel actually a little bit, but not only is it that there is no intrinsic meaning to the universe, but we are doomed to try to find meaning, and our repeated attempts are just sort of this pathetic, absurd, sad spectacle in the midst of all this nothingness, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well, and one thing, just to give Baker more of his flowers here, to make people think, because I don't, even in some of the videos I've made, I think I've come off maybe a bit negative because I do have criticisms or things that I'm not so sure about.
yeah,
But overall, like I said, I really respect him as an author. He writes
yeah.
better. I mean, he's
Very talented.
obviously could argue philosophical circles around me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but one of the things that I do really like is there's this idea in a lot of fiction, but especially with fantasy, of you have sort of the man who must become a monster to fight monsters. You
Mm,
know, um, I, and you're the medieval professor, so you could probably even say that Beowulf is almost a type of that. And there's a certain character in Second Apocalypse who almost is the most extreme that you can take that, like that to the nth degree. And so that, even if for nothing else than the literary games that he's playing, I find interesting to read about and find interesting to see what he does there.
yeah, yeah. He's a prodigiously talented writer. There's no doubt about it in my mind. But yeah, it's not a worldview that I always want to dwell on because I get depressed.
Hmm.
I'd rather look, I'm always the first to admit, hey, maybe Baker's right about all this,
Hmm.
but I'd rather live my life pretending that he's not.
Hmm.
I'd rather live my life even if I don't think I have any free will at all. I have to live as if I do,
Yeah.
right? So I'm going to continue deluding myself because life is better that way, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of dwelling on it, that vision, I find it to be fascinating, but I can't stay there all the time, you
Yeah.
know. Uh,
Yeah, for sure. And what was funny was I went from Baker, and then I read a novel, I think it was City of Thieves by David Benioff,
okay.
and read that shortly after I finished The Judging Eye. And what was funny to me is that, not in every aspect, but there were parts of City of Thieves that were just as dark, if not darker, than what Baker wrote, and that's a historical fiction novel. And it
Yeah.
just cracked me up of like, well, I guess real history is darker even than grimdark fantasy at its height. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I read, oh, what's the title? Mystic River after
mm,
finishing a Baker book, which is, I don't know
that's a
if you've
pick me
read.
up.
Yeah, a real pick me up there. It was one of the most depressing months of my life. Which, okay, fine. Again, a very talented author, though, by the
Yeah,
way. Well, gosh, what's his name? Who wrote Mystic River?
Dennis Lehane.
Yes, Lehane. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Very talented, but really depressing,
Mm.
very nihilistic. But yeah, I mean, there's a place for that. I mean, we certainly don't want to read just books where everything is happy and everybody's, I mean, because I guess that would be boring, right?
I think there's value in just having like a full-throated expression of somebody's worldview, just unfiltered, like, and
Yeah,
here it is, and just being willing to sit with that for a few books. Maybe some would argue 7 books is too much, and like, all right, fine. But at least giving them the time of day and really hearing them out and being willing to sit with that. And like you said, even if it's something that for me, like I'm not going to pretend like Baker's stuff, some of it doesn't make me uncomfortable, some of it makes me deeply uncomfortable.
yeah,
But there are some things that he does that are just, well, that have made me really think. Like, yeah. Anyway, so I appreciated, if for nothing else, than just hearing another perspective and not being able to like flip through it quickly and move on. He really
yeah.
makes you sit with it.
For sure. And I think it's a different kind of discomfort than you would get from something like Book of the New Sun, for
Hmm.
example. I think that's a series that for me, I had to be comfortable being uncomfortable to read
Hmm.
Book of the New Sun because there's just so much in it, particularly the first time. Now I'm reading it again and I'm getting a lot more, by the way,
Hmm.
on the second read. I'm finding it easier to read the second time.
Hmm.
that first time, man, it was just like, what is this? Why is this character suddenly randomly back? And
Right, right.
what are they doing? And just a different way of really telling a story from it's funny because I'm a medievalist, and the way I finally made it sort of make sense for me was to read it more like a medieval
Mm,
text where in medieval times they loved, typology and
mm,
stuff like that. And suddenly it was like, oh, he's doing typology here. That's what
hmm
he's doing. This is highly symbolic. And he kind of tells you that right from the beginning, right? His meditation on language and meaning and how we think we're the ones who create the symbols, but actually, no, the symbols kind of create us,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And so, yeah, he's telling you from the get-go, this is what I'm doing to you, reader.
hmm
And I'm experimenting. It's like talk about a thought experiment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you agree with that reading of Book of the New Sun?
Yeah, and like I've read it a couple times, but even on this most recent reread that we've been doing,
Mm,
there was a passage that I'd never stopped and noted before, and I did this time. I'm like, oh, like right there, Wolf like tells you what he's doing, and it's about two-thirds of the way through Shadow of the Torturer,
hmm
when Severian is talking with one of his companions, Dorcas. And they're
Uh-huh.
talking about this book that he has. And they're talking about ways that he's thought about stories in the past. And he's like, I was taught that stories tend to have three layers of meaning. One is the literal meaning. Like, if in a story there's a cow eating a grass, it's just, well, that's what it is. It's just the cow eating the grass. He said the second is the meaning within the story. So the way it connects to other pieces and the way it can be symbolic within the story, representing something deeper about the whole of it. And he
Mm,
said, and then the third meaning is, and I'm sure somebody following along in the text is going to say, no, I mean, I could grab it off my shelf and read it, but from memory, the third meaning was that there are symbolic elements that speak to a higher truth.
hmm
And
Yeah.
when I read that, I almost like dropped the book. I was like, Wolf just told you how to understand the whole book that he's doing here.
Right.
Like, on the one level, we've got a fun sword and sorcery, dying earth adventure novel. On the second level, there's all these interconnected things that you can pull out and how the story ties into itself. And then on the third level, there's all of these, like you said, symbolic ties, whether it's to old medieval ideas or things from the Bible or things from other religions that Wolf is pulling in. Um,
Mythologies, yeah.
yeah, yeah. It just, to me, that just makes it almost endlessly readable. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's for people who love figuring out a puzzle,
Mm.
You know. I think that adds a lot of enjoyment to the experience. But yeah, it's fascinating. Is Gene Wolfe your favorite author of all time, or do you have a favorite, or is that I don't know,
That's
because
a
I
good
get the
question.
impression from your channel, Gene Wolfe might be your favorite, but I don't know. I mean, I don't want to pin you down on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. For years, I said, just in terms of like his fiction, that it was C.S. Lewis.
Uh-huh.
And that's because of mainly because of his Ransom trilogy
I like the
and Till
space
We Have
trilogy,
Faces.
actually. I'm
Yeah.
Narnia. I have affection for because, of course,
hmm
who doesn't? Who grew up reading that? But I actually found his space trilogy to be much more provocative,
Hmm.
much more thought-provoking and interesting than Narnia. Not disparaging Narnia.
Yeah.
It's great for what it is, but the space trilogy is something else. If you haven't read that, well, whoa, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
It's very different. So I used to say that. I don't know though. It's probably between it might be between Tolkien and Wolfe. I've never had an author impact me quite the same way that Tolkien has. So I
Uh-huh.
don't know if I'm comfortable unseating him, but if there's somebody who can, I mean, Wolfe's giving him a run for his money as we're getting close to 10 books in with him that I've read, something like that. So, he's definitely trying.
Okay, but you are a Tolkien fan as
Yeah.
well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you
Deep,
grow up?
profound interest deep, profound impact on me. Yeah.
Same here. Yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense. I think I don't remember uh, um, reading another book, and perhaps because it was the first book that I ever really read and just felt so immersed in and transformed by. But yeah, with Lord of the Rings when I was maybe 12 or so,
hmm
was that is an experience I will die remembering.
hmm
It's just, I mean, my entire life course, it's no exaggeration to say, is probably, traceable to that moment of reading, finishing
Yeah.
Return of the King, and just thinking to myself, wow. And I was in the midst of this incredible, cathartic, overwhelming, beautiful, moment, and just thinking, if I could somehow do what this person just did to me, that would be my life,
Hmm.
that would be so great. And ended up going to do a PhD in medieval studies, focusing on Old English and Old Norse and loving languages and writing fantasy. So yeah, I think that was probably traceable to that moment. So similar for you, I guess.
Yeah, although funny enough, I didn't grow up with Tolkien, at least not traditionally.
Uh-huh.
Um, my parents, my mom was a big reader, but not much of speculative fiction, and they're sort of the generation that was very skeptical of Harry Potter, and so
Okay.
anything that smelled like that, they were like, nope. And so Narnia was out the window, Lord of the Rings was out the window, so basically almost
Really?
anything fantasy was like not allowed. Um,
Huh.
Having said that, and sorry, mom and dad, if you're watching this, but I did sneak in and read a copy of The Hobbit and Fellowship of the Ring when I was younger, but never read the
Oh,
whole thing until I was in college. Never read
okay.
till
Okay.
Return of the King. Um, but
Yeah.
still, even then, has had a big impact on me then.
And
But
just in
yes, as a
case mom and
kid.
dad are watching this, don't worry. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings is profoundly reverential. It is one of the most, without ever explicitly talking about religion at all, it is still one of the most religious stories you can ever read, I think. In terms of the reverence that is just pervasive in the story. And of course, Tolkien, like Gene Wolfe, was a devout Roman Catholic. So that was definitely, unlike C.S. Lewis in Narnia, though, it wasn't allegorical or explicit, so much as just woven throughout the tale. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. So Tolkien
No.
you read when you were in college. Okay.
Yeah. And I guess I should say, because I talk about Wolf and Tolkien and all of the like for what it's worth, I'm not a Catholic, at least not yet. But I find a lot of the things that they explore and play with fascinating. So of a similar enough ilk that's why I think that
Yeah.
speaks to me. Um,
Yeah, I don't actually myself participate in organized religion, but by inclination, I'm actually more attracted to the liturgical, let's
mm,
say, traditions. I like the aesthetics of
yeah.
a Catholic service, or let's say a high church like Anglican service or something. I love stained glass windows and incense and all of that. There's something just for me. I love going into an old cathedral and.
Philip, are you telling me a cathedral is more beautiful than a non-denominational coffee shop looking church that's on the corner?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of like the warehouse style of architecture. I hope that doesn't come across the wrong way. But no, yeah, the aesthetics, and there's nothing wrong, I think, with tying aesthetics to religion. That's part of
Hmm.
the experience, part of the experience of the sacred. I think
Yeah.
that a certain kind of aesthetic is just an expression of that experience of the sacred. And I feel that, there is something to be admired about a culture, let's say medieval Europe, where they were willing to put so much of their time and their resources into
Hmm.
building something beautiful. Whereas what do we build today that's
Yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah.
right? We are, I'm convinced that, if humanity exists in another 1,000 years or 2,000 years, they're going to look back in our times. Why did they like such ugly buildings?
Yeah. If you think of like an old cathedral that took, the people who started building it know that they're not going to live to see
Yeah,
its completion. It's like, can you
yeah,
even imagine somebody doing that simply for those reasons and not for, because it's going to make us money reasons nowadays? Like never, would never
yeah.
happen.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, so there's just something about that I love.
Hmm.
And yeah, I feel at home in a cathedral, even though I
Hmm.
don't participate.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up definitely in a in the Christian tradition,
Mm.
Protestant. My father's a UCC minister, and my grandfather, great grandfather, mix really of Methodist and Baptist and what have
Sure.
you. But in my college years, I actually went to an Episcopal church, and
Mm.
it was more high church
Mm.
because I was more and more attracted to that aesthetic, the
Yeah.
liturgical, and I got into that for a while, for sure. And I still love it. And there's something very calming and meditative about participating in a liturgy, right?
Hmm.
That I find to be good for the soul, right? So,
And
anyway.
I, as more of an outsider, I look at, what, like, say, take like the Latin Mass, to think of
Mhm,
something like that that has been repeated and has been a core part of what this group of people believe for
mhm.
almost 2,000 years
Yep.
is like there's something to that that's special. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying.
I think it's easier to see yourself as part of something bigger, right?
Mm.
Like you said, you're participating in a ritual that's been going on for a very long time.
Hmm.
Participating it not only with the people immediately surrounding you, but with the
Hmm.
people who've done it for those thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
And I like the idea of, and I understand why, they went to vernacular with the
Yeah.
mass and all that, because people should understand what they're saying, I suppose.
Right, right.
But I guess I don't know, traditionalist in me does love the idea of a Latin mass,
Hmm.
the idea of it being in a sacred language, right?
Yeah.
Which transports you from the secular to a sacred realm, right?
Hmm.
You're in the midst of something much bigger than yourself. I love that. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah.
When you even think like, and just in terms of aesthetics, look at something like the Lord of the Rings movies, when
Hmm.
there's bits where the elves are only speaking in Elvish. And I think Viggo Mortensen even joked that he tried to get all of his dialogue with the elves. Like, can we make it all Elvish? And there's
Yeah,
something like there's a different temperature almost to those
absolutely.
scenes just from
Absolutely.
that of just you actually, and maybe a part of it's because you have to hone in and read the written word, rather than just kind of zone out and take it in. But yeah, no, even just on an aesthetic level, you can see that in like a fantasy movie like that.
Yeah. And let's not forget that as much as I'm a fan of the Peter Jackson films, so I'm not disparaging them, but those films lose a lot of the reverence that's actually in
Mm.
the books, right?
Yeah.
Just because there's more emphasis on the action and whatnot.
Hmm.
But he does, particularly in the extended versions, I think he attempts to at least give a nod to that reverence.
Yeah.
I think, there's that wonderful little added scene with Frodo and Sam, and when they're beginning their
Hmm.
adventures, and they come across or they witness elves walking through the forest,
Hmm.
and the elves are, of course, they're glowing and
Right.
else, and Sam says something really in the only the way that Sam could in that moment that is seemingly simple but also very profound when he says something to the effect that I don't know why, but it makes me sad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's right. Yep.
There's that reverence,
Hmm.
there's that sense of the numinous that pervades Tolkien's story. And I love that you get these nods to it, even in the Peter Jackson films, which do emphasize more of the action than that sense of the numinous that exists in the original. But yeah, you get that in there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that as a kid also very much attracted me in the
Mm.
Tolkien stories. And I doubt I ever could have articulated it, but the idea that there is something ancient here,
Hmm.
the idea that our time is just one little moment in the flow of this great river, and there's been so much that has preceded us, and there's more that will come after us,
Hmm.
and we're just part of this vast thing. And you can see the layers and this is something you see not obviously just in Tolkien, but Tolkien, I think, helped it to become a staple of fantasy. It's in Malazan, it's
Hmm.
in Realm of the Elderlings, it's in Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. It's in so many. I mean, it's just too
Yeah.
many to bother naming. But this idea that there are these layers of the past, and in these layers of the past, we can hear echoes of their lives, but they're also reflections of ourselves.
Hmm.
And in the future, people are going to hear us the same way. That's something I love about fantasy.
Yeah.
I'm so here for that, and I
Yeah.
tried to put in my own writing as well. It's this idea that we are connected to the past. We're part of this flow, and it is all one river,
Hmm.
right? But we're in this particular moment right now, at least the way we can perceive it. But yeah, that is something that Tolkien just made me want more and more of this sense of connection, and you become part of something bigger when you see yourself that way, right?
When I think that's why like Tolkien, um, there's lots of good fantasy that's being written today, but I do think there's a lot of it that is going to be forgotten in 50 years, 100 years, 200
Yeah.
years.
Oh
And
yeah.
I don't think Tolkien is going to. And a part of that is because, like you said, he's plugged into an older tradition, knowing, into older myths and legends and his vast knowledge of all of that, even if you don't recognize all of it as a reader, I think some of it comes through subconsciously. Whereas for many modern fantasy writers, the oldest thing they're plugged into is Tolkien. And not to disparage, those people, but I do think there's an enduring quality to what he does that'll last longer.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. And the very thing I've been talking about, this ubi sunt theme, where are they, right? The ones who came before us. This is something that Tolkien is very much deliberately and consciously echoing from Old English literature. I mean, just read Beowulf, everyone. Read Beowulf. It's there. It's all over. Beowulf was a poem, most likely originally written in the 8th century by a Christian Anglo-Saxon looking back on his pagan ancestors with a sense of admiration and for their courage and their loyalty and these values that they could agree with, but also a sense of tragicness at the futility of, let's say, their worship of great deeds as a way to beat the darkness, as a way to at least combat the darkness. I mean, that's a battle you're going to lose, right? Where you're going to die. Mortality is a too great of a reality for us to resist. But there's a certain admiration we can have in people who strive to make their mark in the world, right? We're doomed, but hey, let's just have some courage in the face of that certain doom. And this poet obviously had a deep sense of admiration, but at the same time, there's a tragicness to the futility of some of this. And that is something that Tolkien very much is picking up from Beowulf and other Old English texts. Is this idea of the past, looking at the past, and it's an interesting thing now. Of course, we read this poem, which is so old, and this poet who's looking back on the past, and we're looking back on the poet looking back on the past. So there's another level to it altogether. For someone like Tolkien, clearly understood that. So yeah, that is just I agree with you absolutely that this is a one of the reasons why Lord of the Rings will endure is that it is very much plugged into older traditions and themes that are universal and timeless. Yeah.
Philip, well, can we pause for just a second here?
Oh yeah,
Sorry
sure.
to make you edit, but
All right, we're back, everybody, after a brief moment when Sam had to perform his paternal duties.
that's right.
So another series actually I wanted to get to talk to you about, and I'm not sure if you started or not, but I think you would love because there's just so much to dig into. Is The Wars of Light and Shadow by Jenny
Mm.
Wirtz. I'm sure you've been hearing about it on in our corner of BookTube in various places. But is that a series you've started yet, or you find yourself
No, I
okay?
just
Okay.
I have book one and I
Okay.
think book eight.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. They're not
so
always easy to get, unfortunately. Yeah.
yeah,
But the bigger the mass market paperback ones are easier to find than anything else. But I can't read the tiny print in those myself.
right, right.
But anyway, yeah, this is a series. There's so much to dig into. It is so vast and profound and beautiful. I just think you're going to really like Wars of Light and Shadow if you have a chance to get to it. Is that something in your plans?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been reading it recently, and a lot of people seem to really like it. So I have a couple of Janny's standalones, Master of White Storm, Tried Hell's Chasm,
Okay.
and so like I mentioned. before, or maybe this was before we started recording, but the thought of a big series can be a little intimidating of like, man,
Yeah.
that's a lot of commitment. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's in the plans, but we'll see. Hopefully get to something Janny within the next couple of months here though, because
Okay.
I know that she's just spent a lot of time to hone her craft and
Oh
seems to
my
have
goodness. Yeah.
seems to have a lot of deeper things going on than maybe what it would appear on the surface. So I'm definitely interested.
Yeah. No, you have so much fun with that, I think. And Realm of the Elderlings, have you read that yet?
No, so this is where all the chinks in the armor come out. No, Robin Hobb is one of those authors. So I have Farseer and then also Scott Lynch are two that I've kind of saved as like
Uh-huh.
rainy day reads. I'm like, I'm sure I
Okay.
will like
They're very
these.
different, of course.
Yeah.
I love them both, but yeah, very different. Robin Hobb being, to me, one of the most profound
Hmm.
writers out there, and not in a way that's, by the way, difficult. Like her prose is very understated in a way. It's
Hmm.
beautiful, but it's not difficult, if you know what I mean. It's more
Hmm.
accessible. But it is such a profoundly moving and beautiful and emotional and deep uh, series. Whereas Scott Lynch's, Gentleman Bastard sequence, it's a fun.
Yeah.
It's clever and it's fun and it's bloody and dirty and messy and gritty. All of that. I love them both. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So
so
I
those are
have
your missing pieces, huh?
Yeah, so those are some of the missing pieces in my fantasy. So I have them like up as like, okay, I'll save these for someday when I'm just needing something that I know is going to be great and that I'll like. But yeah, so no plans immediately, but Janny hopefully sooner rather than later. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think you're going to be someone that people are going to be interested in watching your experience with the Words of Light and Shadow for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we are also here to talk about not what you haven't read. We're here to talk about what you have read, which leads me to my standard question for my guest. We've already talked a little bit about C.S. Lewis being an important one for you, but I'm sure we can get into that a little more. But yeah, going on the somewhat questionable assumption that you are what you read, because there's more to you than that, obviously, right? But going on the assumption that you are very much informed by what you read.
There you go.
There we go. It just sounds snappier to say you are what you read,
Yeah.
right?
Fits on a t-shirt better, you
It
know.
fits on a t-shirt, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, what have been some of the formative, important reading experiences of your life, Sam? And go back as far as you like, and
Yeah.
the creation of your channel and all that.
So one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish is where it all started.
All right, I love
Fox
it.
and socks. No, growing up, a lot of my siblings were readers. Like I said, my mom was a reader, although, maybe some different types of reading. But one thing that we had growing up, and this is what I attribute my like start of like really wanting to read too, is my mom had a set of very nicely bound, illustrated, very beautiful classics that were
Mm,
put on the top of the tallest bookshelf and almost revered, like, no, you're not allowed to read those, you're not allowed to touch those, those are very nice. And I have since gotten the pleasure, once the kids kind of grew up and dispersed, of getting a couple of those. I actually have like five or six of them.
huh.
But the two most important that I saw, and I was like, I want to get to a good enough point as a reader so that I can be trusted with reading. It's actually this copy, if you don't mind a little show and tell
Oh, let's do it.
of Robin Hood. This is The
Oh,
Adventures of Robin Hood by Lewis Reed, with Frank Godwin illustrations. Um, and this is like these old-timey black and white illustrations. And then let me
yeah.
see if I can get a character sheet in here. Yes, and then they'd have like this is Robin Hood. And this, I read this book probably like six times when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
this is in like King Jameth Old English, like, nay, quoth Robin Hood, that target is no test of an archer's skill, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Quoth. So I learned a big word there that day.
It's a good
Um,
one. It's a good one.
but this was sort of where like my love of reading started was this Robin Hood, but then also Peter Pan by James Barrie. Um, both
Nice.
of these were like, I really wanted, for whatever reason, just had something in the back of my mind. I want to read Robin Hood and I want to read Peter Pan.
Wow.
and read both of them multiple times. And I attribute these books. They also had the Jungle Book and Prince and the Pauper, and so I read those as well when I was little that were in this edition.
But putting them out of your reach was probably a guaranteed way to make you want those stories, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I those two especially though I attribute as like my love of reading to start with that.
Uh-huh.
And then also Jungle Book. So,
Uh-huh. Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. So those were the youthful influences, and those are some good ones to
Yeah.
spark an imagination, get you going on the path. And where did you go from there?
Yeah, we also had this book and once again another show and tell item.
Oh, the more the better. Yeah.
This was a book that we had just I don't even know like this was just on one of our random bookshelves of books that we were allowed to get to, but it was called A Book of Brave Deeds. I don't know
Ah,
if you remember these types of books that they would have back in the day where they just had like a bunch of like excerpts from other books compiled together for children to read. And
yep.
this is one that looks like it was probably aimed at, young boys to read. And this had some excerpts from I believe it was called, let me see here. I believe it was Tales from My Grandfather is what it was called by Sir Walter Scott. And it
Oh,
was
okay. Yeah.
stories of, yeah, from Tales of a Grandfather. That's right, by Walter Scott. And it was the story of William Wallace and
Yeah.
Robert the Bruce and a bunch of the Scottish rebels of that time. And so this also, in the vein of swashbuckling and adventures and, things that will set a boy's imagination afire. Those were pretty significant. And I think having books both that you could read, but then also ones that were like treasured and special,
Sure.
like was important to me when I was a kid and starting that. So
Yeah.
a
That's
lot of what I
great.
read when I was younger. Sorry, what?
I just think it's wonderful. Walter Scott was actually, I haven't talked about this maybe ever on my channel, but I had a copy of Ivanhoe
Mm.
as a teenager and read it. And that was an important book for me, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I read Ivanhoe and then also read I had a friend of mine who got me to read The Heart of Midlothian by Sir
Uh-huh.
Walter Scott.
Yeah.
So I read that when I was younger. A lot of what I read, like when I was younger, I'm not gonna say I'm not pretentious anymore, but when I was younger I was really pretentious. And I was like, if it's not a classique, like that was like what I wanted to read because
Yeah.
sort of in the vein of what we were saying with Tolkien there, if it's endured for this amount of time, odds are it's probably pretty good than what was published last week.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so like when I was really little, like Jules Verne was my favorite author when I was young. Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. And that's probably where reading, especially speculative fiction,
Yeah.
started was with those guys. So
Yeah.
I read Around the World in 80 Days. That's up in the top five books I've reread the most. Because when I was a kid, that just was like
I love that one
thrilling, you know?
too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I remember reading that one more than
But
one. Yeah.
yeah, so that and then also like Jack London, Alexander Dumas, like there's no for as big and intimidating as it is, there is no book that is more readable than The Count of Monte Cristo. Just a page turner and a half. Um,
Yeah.
but I would say, like, if you don't, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm rambling here.
No, this is great. And these aren't books that you normally talk about on your channel, right?
No, not a whole lot.
Yeah.
And a part of it's because I haven't read them in
In a
in
long time.
forever, you know. Um, but one that, if I were to talk about like books that have had a profound impact on my life, like novels, there's very few besides Lord of the Rings. Let me pick this up here that I can point to that have had more of a profound impact than Les Miserables by Victor
Okay.
Hugo.
You go. Yeah. Yeah.
And this
I
was
read
my
that as
first
a
copy of
teenager.
it.
Yeah.
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 I still remember when I was younger, there were radio dramas of like different classical literature that I liked listening to, and they had Ben-Hur that I listened through, had At the Back of the North Wind, Billy Budd, so just classic novels as radio dramas, and I didn't know what Les Miserables was. I just knew it was a radio drama, and I was just listening to stuff all the time, and went into it completely blind. And I still remember listening to the last 30 minutes on a car ride back home from where our family was. I was probably 12 at the time, 13.
Uh-huh.
And the ending of the story and to use a word you like using here a lot, the catharsis at the end of the story
Yeah.
was so impactful. I've it knocked like I literally went and just sat on a couch at 12 years old, feeling like I've never had a story impact me the way this one has. And I know people have their criticisms of Les Mis. The book is overly long. Hugo is melodramatic to the nth degree, and to a certain extent, I don't care about any of it. And after listening to the radio drama, um, even with how long the book was, I was like, dang it, I'm going to read this. And for as much as I like the musical and I like different movie versions of it, nothing beats the book for Hugo's depth and the things that he gets across in that novel.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I read that as a teen myself, Jean Valjean and all
That's
that.
right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've never seen the musical though. Have you?
Yeah, I went to see a high school that put on a version of the musical, and they weren't very good, but they tried their hardest. But no, I've seen the movie version of the musical, which I know not all Les Mis fans like, but I enjoy just fine. So
Okay, cool. Yeah,
yeah,
you had some great. I mean, that's a wonderful foundation you're describing there. Very rich and what they call the classics,
yeah.
which weren't always classics. They were just stories that had a profound impact, as you say, on a lot of people. And they realized, wow, this story touches on some stuff that's really important in my life. And that's
When
what makes classic, right?
Yeah. When I was a teenager, though, I don't know where it came from. It may have been, I talked about kind of sneaking in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and reading some of that, and it may have been from that. Or it may have been from I liked Edgar Rice Burroughs, so Tarzan and John
Mm-hmm.
Carter of Mars. I really liked Tarzan when I was younger. Read
Yeah,
several of those.
yeah.
So I don't know where it came from, but tried to I tried to be, not get in trouble with mom and dad, but also be like, what fantasy things can I get away with? Like, and basically how it worked was if they hadn't heard of it, odds are it was okay, because they don't have an opinion on it if they haven't heard of it. And
Right.
so, um, a couple of classics got in just fine. Like when I was a kid, and you're gonna love this, Philip. And this is also in the top 5 books that I've reread the most, and I haven't read this in years. But when I was a kid, I read and reread and reread
Oh,
Beowulf
good for you. Yeah. All
by
right.
and especially the Seamus Heaney version.
Uh-huh.
Um, when I was a kid, and I don't know what it was because it's not like this is written to like appeal to a teenager
Not
necessarily.
really. No.
But I
No.
just love this. My younger brother and I actually memorized a portion of this and presented it as like a dramatic performance for the two
Okay.
of us that we did
Okay.
in a competition when we were younger.
All right. Now
Um,
you just completely solidified yourself as my favorite booktuber.
yes. I tried to read as many like translations of this as I could find. So,
Yeah.
Tolkien's, Burton Raphael's, but Heaney is still my favorite, at least that I've
I
read.
like Heaney's. It's an aesthetic translation. Let's put it
Mm.
that way. There are certain liberties taken the meaning. If you want to read one without learning Old English,
Hmm.
which of course is the best way to experience the
That's
poem,
right.
but if you want to read one that I think is oh, I put it over there, so I can't just grab it. But anyway, that I think is probably the closest you can get without learning Old English to experiencing the poem, then it's definitely the Tom Shippey translation.
He's a Tolkien scholar, right?
He is also a Tolkien scholar. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've actually had him on my channel
That's
before
right. Yeah.
to discuss his translation of Beowulf, which I
Mm.
read and chatted about with him. He's a very widely respected scholar in Old English, Old Norse, same kind of things. He actually met Tolkien
Wow.
at one point. Yep.
Okay.
When he was young, obviously, and he's in his 80s now, but he's probably the most known and respected Tolkien scholar, but his real training is in medieval literature.
Hmm.
But his translation of Beowulf, I think, is very faithful. But also, one of the things I like about it too is it's facing page translation, meaning the Old English is on one side and his translation
Hmm.
is on the other. And you don't have to really uh, understand Old English to see certain words that have survived. You're not going to be able to really read the Old English by itself if you
Hmm.
haven't studied it. but you'll see certain words and things over there. And for somebody who wants to compare it to the original, it's right there. And there are some great notes in there as well. So it's a lovely translation.
Hmm.
So if you ever wanted to read another and get closer to the feel and the meaning of the original, I think Shippies is fantastic.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah, because a
Yeah.
lot of, kind of like what I was mentioning, a lot of, it's like, all right, so I can get away with fantasy if it's a classic, and I can get away with it if it's old like Beowulf.
Yeah.
Um, so like what else can I read? And have you ever read and I'm sure you have, but have you ever read The Heliand?
No, wait, what is it?
Or is it The Heliand, The Helliand? It's like a Viking retelling of the Gospels.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay. Yeah, yeah. No, I do know what you're referring to. But I don't think I've
Yeah.
actually read
And
that per se. Yeah.
I might be mispronouncing it, but I found that I was like, "What is this?" But I've read that at a young age as well.
Let
Um,
me see. How do you spell it?
um,
H-E.
Heliand, I think.
Yes, yes, yes. That is ringing a ton of bells. And it's Helliand actually, and it's in Old Saxon,
There we
meaning
go.
not Viking, but Old
Okay.
Saxon, meaning it's so related, more closely related to Old English, but it would have been written and in the what's I guess it's not like Old High German, which is more like the
Hmm.
ancestral language of what is now High German, but what's spoken in Saxony, that part of Germany, and also
Okay.
wouldn't have been the ancestor. Basically, the Saxons came from, that part of Germany, and would have spoken that. But this is from the ninth century, and it's in Old Saxon. So yeah, it's been a long time. I think I actually did read this a long time ago when I was first learning.
Hmm.
But it's in alliterative verse, Germanic epic style. Um, and yeah, it's been so long. You're reminding me of something I read like probably 20, 30 years ago. So yeah.
Like help me ground this in my history's not great. Would this be like before Alfred the Great, after Alfred, in terms of the timeline? Where would that
It's
land?
actually almost simultaneous. It's ninth
Okay.
century, so Alfred was around like 870s and stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, yeah, very cool. Yeah, wow, I haven't thought about this in the longest time. But yeah, so you read a translation of this?
Yeah, I found it at the library and was like, well,
Okay.
this looks like slightly fantastical. I think I'm trying to remember because it's been a while since I've read it as well.
Yeah.
Like, I think even like Satan is a character in it, which obviously you don't get quite as much if you read the New Testament. And like things like that that were just weird and interesting enough to hold my attention when I was when I was a teenager.
Well, it's similar to a poem that I have read much more and more recently, "The Dream of the Rood,"
Mm,
which it is in Old English, not in Old Saxon. Very close, by the way, and probably
mm,
people in England could have read Old Saxon.
okay.
Essentially, "The Dream of the Rood" is another poem in which you have this interesting mix between the pagan heroic ethos and the newfangled religion, Christianity, right?
Hmm.
So in the Dream of the Rood, you have a dreamer who encounters this vision of the cross, and the
Mm,
cross speaks to the speaker, and the cross is talking about salvation and its role in the crucifixion, and it speaks as if it were a loyal warrior and it
mm,
had a profoundly uncomfortable duty to do, which is to be the cross, right?
hmm,
The instrument of Christ's torture, right? And it didn't want to do it, but it knew it had to do it for the greater plan, right? So
mm,
it did its role, right? And it's this loyal thane, this loyal warrior, whereas Christ is this Lord who, contrary to the descriptions in the gospel, because remember, they're trying to sell this religion to a very martial, heroic oriented culture.
right.
And they can't have a passive figure at the head of this religion. They need to have a warrior, right?
Hmm.
So the Jesus in the Dream of the Rood is a warrior, right? Who doesn't like just lie down and get nailed to the cross. He's like stepping up there and like, all right, bring it on, kind of, he's this kind of warrior Jesus,
Sure.
which is of course a better sell
Yeah, yeah.
to this kind of culture. But it's interesting because in this culture as well, you did have a tradition of tree worship, uh, which
Oh,
the
hmm,
cross kind of fits nicely into, right? You have Yggdrasil in
hmm,
Norse mythology, which is the world tree, and they had sacred groves, which were where they would often hang their sacrifices, including some human
hmm,
sacrifices. So tree worship was a big part of the culture. So it was one aspect with which the Christian missionaries could say, "Oh, you guys worship trees. Cool. We got a tree in our religion. See, here it is.
hmm.
It's the cross, right?"
Yeah.
Um, so it became a very important symbol
Hmm.
in medieval Christianity. Whereas early Christians, the fish was more of their symbol. The
Sure,
cross
sure.
became more and more important later on. But yeah, yeah, the Helium. Yeah, I remember it now. It's been so long since I read that.
Hmm.
But yeah, similar kind of thing where you
Yeah.
have this marriage of pagan heroic ethos with Christianity, which
Hmm.
you're a modern Christian, you're more familiar with the actual Gospels, and there's a kind of a like, wait, what? Warrior Jesus? Wait, which you could take in a symbolic way,
Hmm.
I grew up, singing hymns like "Onward, Christian Soldiers,
That's
Marching to
right.
War" and all that. So yeah, there's a martial, I guess, tradition there, a metaphor to be had. But if you read the Gospels, uh, Jesus was he wept,
Hmm.
tears, and not just tears, but tears with blood,
Hmm.
and he asked in that moment, there's something very profoundly um, agonizing about the whole experience.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so it's interesting how the in those times of conversion they had to sell the story to the culture, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So we are interrupting your journey once again.
No, no, that's good. Well, and I'm even like some of those connections. I'm like, oh, I've never thought about that before. So I'm learning here quite a bit actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Um, but another one in terms of like speculative fiction was George MacDonald when I was
Oh,
younger.
yeah,
Um,
Fantastes and Lilith and all of that. Yeah.
yeah, so I think my main one that I read when I was younger was At the Back of the North Wind.
Okay.
Um, and that one was an odd experience for me because I had when I was probably preteen or a very young teenager and had just a nightmare. And I don't remember anything about it other than it was about death and dying. And, as I'm sure a lot of kids do at that age, it scared me a lot. And the next day, I went through or started At the Back of the North Wind for the first time, which, if you've read it, is actually a book about death, and it's a book for kids about death. And treats it in a very uh, not in the way that you would expect. Let's just say that he kind of takes his own twist to it, and so that was also another like important book for me at a young age in terms of like speculative reading.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Le Guin's or Wizard of Earthsea was like that for me, which
Hmm.
on one level it is a book about death, you know, very much so.
Yeah.
Death and life is two sides of a coin, really. So, yeah.
But then probably my like major fantasy reading began when I said, I read Farmer Giles of Ham, I've read The Hobbit, but the only dragon riding stuff that I've seen has been like these How to Train Your Dragon movies where they're kind of like cutesy pets. And I'm like, I want to see something with like real like dragon riding in it. And I had a friend who said, if you like dragon riding, you should read Aragon.
Aha.
And they
Yeah.
did not recommend it, but they said there's a dragon rider in the Game of Thrones books. And so
Aha.
read Aragon, thought it was fine, kind of moved on. But the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Game of Thrones, I read before I read The Lord of the Rings in its entirety. And I read this probably when I was 14 or 15, which is maybe a bit young to be reading George Martin.
I would
Um,
say a little, maybe.
So maybe that explains a thing or two about why Sam is the way he is today. But I read this
I don't
in,
know how that, by the way, how did that get by mom and dad? I don't know.
they didn't know what it was. They were like,
Oh,
oh,
okay.
okay, So it was like, hey, mom, can I read this? It was like, sure. So once again, sorry, mom and dad, if you're watching. Um, But this, I read this, and I'd never read anything like what George Martin was doing in this before. His actual prose writing is still some of my favorite. Just gripping, very readable. Um, and obviously people talk about his character work. Feeling very, and I don't know if I knew about the big spoiler at the end of this book or not when I read it, but I remember feeling very connected to Eddard Stark as a character, the
Sure.
noble, like heroic father figure,
Yeah,
um, especially as a son, connecting a lot to that.
yeah.
And I think I read this either in a day, if not that day and a half. Just flew through this first book. And funny enough, didn't finish the series until a few years ago.
Well, I
Only
mean,
read
the
the first
series
few.
actually not finished, so no
Yes,
one
well,
has finished the series.
so I should rephrase this. Was not current with the series until a
Right,
few
right, right.
years ago.
I'm sorry, I was being snarky. Yeah,
That's all right.
yeah.
But this
And
first one, in terms of like, if we're talking about like my overall fantasy reading and kind of the books that made me, this is probably the last one that I'd cap it off with is reading A Game of Thrones when I was you know, middle teenager. And just
so, what's your
really
take
being
on
impacted by it.
as far as so? There's a degree to which honorable and loyal characters in the series seem to not fare very well. Whereas the really clever
Hmm.
backstabbing types seem to thrive, or a certain degree of cleverness at least is necessary. But I do think that Martin is not entirely anti-heroic in
Hmm.
the series. That there is, if you look at particularly the younger characters, a lot of them are on a kind of hero's journey. Like
Yeah.
Jon Snow is clearly learning the
Yeah.
importance of loyalty up at the wall, for example, and he befriends the others there, and they not only does he help them, but they help him on his
Hmm.
path. That's a really important message there. So, what's your take on as far as how some people would even look at it as it's pure grimdark, it's nihilistic, blah blah blah. But what's your take on A Song of Ice and Fire as far as where that falls in the spectrum of, let's say, noble, bright, heroic type fantasy on one side, and then on the other side, Baker, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where is the Song of Ice and Fire?
That's a good question. It's something I don't think I would have had an answer for even a few years ago, and I don't remember where I heard this. It may have been Jimmy though, because he does the
Yeah,
Song of Ice and Fire podcast that he's
yeah,
on,
yeah.
which I've listened to somewhat.
It's his favorite series of all time. So
Yeah, so it may have been from him. So I want to make sure I credit that this is not an original
yeah,
thought from me. And if it wasn't for if whoever said this first, we'll give credence to them. But somebody pointed out that if you just read book one, it's easy to walk away being like, oh yes, like, if you try to do the right thing, it'll get you killed. But they pointed out that actually you kind of have to play the long game with Martin, and really sit with the series as a whole and not just end at one book. Because if you look at book one, it's easy to walk away being like, Ned Stark tried to do the right thing, wasn't cunning enough, and look where it got him.
yeah.
And it ended up with, a haircut that went wrong. Versus you look at somebody like, what's his name? The father of the Lannisters. I'm
Yeah,
blanking.
Tywin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Tywin. Thank you. I'm blanking on his name here. So Tywin Lannister, and you look
Mhm.
at him, and it's like, but he's the real clever one. He knows what's going on in Westeros. But by the end of, like, let's say where we're current in Dance with Dragons, like, where is things? Tywin's empire has fallen apart. He, the only person he has, like, not even his daughter is in power anymore. His sons hate each other. One of them is drinking himself to death halfway across the world. Nobody is loyal to the Lannisters. Nobody likes them. And you look at the loyalty with which people fight for the Starks, and people fight for the name of Eddard Stark, even though he's been dead for 5 books at this point, and the way that people are willing to go to the ends of the earth to try to rescue the Stark girls, and the loyalty that that inspires. And if you look at just the short term, you ended at book one. it could be easy to walk away being like, yes, the heroes, are the ones who are killed and the villains survive. But in terms of the overall plot of the series, I don't know if that's where it's going. That certainly doesn't seem to be the results of Ned Stark's decisions
Hmm.
seem to work out much better for his family, even if it didn't in the short run, than
Hmm.
say like what Tywins have. So I don't know. That's
Interesting.
that's my 2 cents on it so far.
Yeah, no, I like that take. Yeah. And we'll put in some timestamps or something for spoilers for Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah.
Yes.
I think if you haven't heard about this, then I don't know where you've been, but because the HBO series made it
Yeah.
so like a part of.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, no, I'll put a timestamp and just warn people if they want to avoid that. But and
Yeah.
there's so much more to the series than just what we've been talking about anyway, that
Yeah.
I wouldn't even consider that much of a spoiler, honestly. But yeah. So anyway, yeah. So now we're at current Sam, I guess, right? Is it, or have we reached current Sam in terms of,
Yeah.
were there any other big
More or less, I
ones
guess
you
just
want
to
to mention?
summarize it briefly, like a lot of people didn't read much fiction during college, except for The Lord of the Rings and Dune. And after college, it then went. Well, the funny thing is, and I won't make this a huge tangent, but I actually, when I was a young teen or a middle teen, like 15, 16, and 17, had a booktube channel. Uh, but that was
Is it still
pre-COVID.
around? Wait, does it exist still?
No, it no longer exists. It
Oh,
was pre-COVID. Nobody was talking about, I wasn't in circles that were talking about fantasy, and I got bored very quickly of reading young adult and Divergent and, The Fault in Our Stars, and realized I wasn't having fun, and I never topped 80 subscribers, 100 subscribers. So,
okay.
um, did it for like 2 years and then walked away. And then watched booktube here and after college was like, you know what? I'm reading, all these things that people are talking about. Might as well turn on the camera and try it
Right.
again and see if maybe I can actually make a few friends this time and interact with people
Now, are
and
you
like.
sure there's no vault where we could get footage from the teenage Sam doing his thing?
So I'll say this: if you go on, there's a booktuber, a very like he goes way back, Crimson Rogue. He does book content. There's a couple of shout outs of my old channel, which was creatively called Sam the Book Boy.
This
I
is so
want to,
cool.
and in
Okay.
every video, here was my shtick: I wore a fedora because I thought it was cool.
It is
So
very cool. Yeah.
there's a couple of shout outs on Crimson Rogue's channel, and then Dominic Noble also does book content, and I was in a Q&A that he did it like from 5 years ago. So those are the only traces, as far as I can tell, that still exist of
Wow.
this.
Okay, everybody go uncover it. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, he's so cool. Huh.
Teenage Sam.
So if you want to see
So
Teenage Sam in a fedora, now you're Sam 2.0, I
you know
guess.
where to look. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's so cool. Is this the first time you've talked about that?
I've mentioned it here and there, but
Okay.
like there's nothing too like sexy about the story. So other than I read books that I didn't want to read and so gave up pretty quickly. Well, it was a couple of years, so not quickly actually, but got
Okay.
discouraged after that and walked away and
All right. Well, that's good. Yeah.
now
Huh.
I'm back.
Well, I won't tell people about my teenage booktube channel.
Yeah, that's right.
I just
On
there was no booktube or even YouTube or internet.
I was gonna say, was that on a typewriter or stone tablets?
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah. Stone tablets. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
So I was lucky to grow up in a time when no one had footage of me being an idiot when I was a teenager.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I
Uh
mean, just the people who were there know, but yeah. So wow. So now we're at current Sam and your current booktube channel and everything else. So what we've talked about actually a lot of stuff you're reading and what you're going to read. But just before we say goodbye,
yeah.
um, let's get a sense, if you don't mind, of what I mean, a lot of people don't really plan too far in advance on their channels, like what am I
Hmm.
doing in a year or whatever, but what's your vision, if you have one, for your channel? Where would you like to see it go? What would you like to do more of?
Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of
Well, in
thing.
terms of, yeah, that's a good question. In terms of reading, I've got I just started going through Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the
Oh,
Unbeliever,
brilliant. I need to do that too. Yeah.
by Stephen Donaldson. So got a couple guys that I'm reading through that with and have been very impressed. Almost like how people say that Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment predicts Nietzsche before Nietzsche even happens. It's like Stephen Donaldson predicts and almost refutes certain points that are common in grimdark novels today, like
Uh-huh.
30, 50 years before they were written. It's been, it's not as flashy or as sexy of a book as, say, the first WoW books, but I've been really enjoying that by Stephen Donaldson. So going through that, and then as if anybody watches my channel, they know Gene Wolfe. I'm going through his a reread of Book of the New Sun, but also his sequel series to that, Book of the Long Sun. I've been going through for the first time this year, and that's been exciting.
Cool.
And then people have been saying, the future of the genre, the most exciting things that are being done, is in self-published fantasy. So I've been trying to do that more. I've got Von Roycroft's first book up on
Nice.
my schedule coming up.
The Thunder
Um,
Nation trilogy. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the Severing Sun is book one. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, and then P.L.
Man.
Stewart's books. I think I'm going to be starting that later this year potentially. So,
Good.
um,
Good. Yeah. I'm going to be, actually, I've read The Drowned Kingdom myself, the first book,
hmm,
but I'm going to be in a buddy read organized by Shay that we're going to go through the series. Now, PL is going to make it 7 books. I think 5 are out currently, but we're going to start that in September. So, yeah.
hey, I think that's probably what that's probably the same group that I'm a
Are
part
we
of
in the
then
same
there.
group?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
cool. All right. Yeah.
So. Yeah, so I'm excited about that, but really what I look for is like people who do something different, you know. I've
Uh-huh.
read Wheel of Time and kind of got burnt out by how samey it felt after 6 books of it, and
Uh-huh.
that's all right. It works better for other people, and so stuff that's different that excites me, that's what I look for. So that's
Well, I
kind
think
of why
self-publishing, indie is where you're going to find more and more of that.
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
but then I'll look forward to that. So that's why Gene Wolfe is a favorite, and been reading Tim Powers recently, and I
Yeah.
don't know who else, but yeah, no, that's a lot of what I look for when I read, and also books that are maybe a bit more divisive. Like I know people have mixed opinions on Brent Weeks. I want to read his
Uh,
Lightbringer books to, come up
I
with a definitive
actually
opinion on it.
I read the
So
first one. Is it the Black Prism? This is the first
that's
one.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I read that. I got through it and then decided, yeah, it's not for me.
not for you. Yeah.
It's pretty rare for me to DNF a series. It's even rarer for me to DNF a book, but
Hmm.
I just felt like, no, this is not what I'm looking for right now. Uh,
Yeah.
it happens very rarely. I just did it again with Dandelion Dynasty, actually. I read
Oh,
the
sure,
first
sure.
two. I read the first 2 books in that case, but the second one kind of did me in.
Was it the poop flamethrower? You couldn't take it after that? You're like,
It wasn't just if it had just been the poop flamethrower, that would have been cool. I like them. That's awesome. But
yeah.
if you do that MacGyver trope again and again and again and again and again, and it's not just that it's the MacGyver trope, it's every time it happens, we interrupt the story in order to
Hmm.
explain exactly how this mechanism works, how this contraption works, and and it's okay. I'm sure there are people who love that, who like getting into the nitty gritty with like engineering kind of are,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And then getting into the whole backstory of how the character thought of it when they saw the poop, fermenting and realized, oh, that's flammable. I could use that, and, and pages of that digression and then going back to the battle to show us what the poop flamethrower does, If it had just been that once or twice, I would have been like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cool. I love that. But it had happened again and again and again. I just got thrown out of the story so many times. It was like, I got a little impatient. And I thought to myself, look, if if the next book is different and it's not this constant MacGyver trope, and also there are other things that he has writerly habits that interrupt the flow, which is,
Hmm.
some people like that style. He does a lot of telling,
Hmm.
which is not my favorite thing, but other readers do prefer that, like to
Hmm.
be told exactly what this scene that we just saw actually means. Whereas I feel like you should be able to figure that out as a reader. I don't need you to hold my hand, thank you. But what he does is a lot of that, like explaining
Sure.
what you just read, in very clear terms. And here, reader, is what you just read,
Hmm.
So I just kept getting kicked out of the story. But I thought to myself, okay, if the next book, if book three is different. So I asked Jimmy actually.
Hmm.
He's a fan of the series. He loves the series. I asked him, is book three more of this? And he said, unfortunately, it's even more
Hmm.
of
He
that same.
doubled down.
Yeah, he doubled down on it. And I was like, okay, then no more. Please. I can't do it. I can't do it. I got really frustrated
Hmm.
reading Wall of Storms, and thinking,
Well, there's so much to read, even if you
yeah,
like,
that's the thing. Why should I
yeah,
torture myself reading something I'm not enjoying when I have so many other books I want to get to, you
that's
know?
right. Yeah.
And I'm glad people love the Dandelion Dynasty. I'm glad that there are people who really love that series and enjoy the repetition of that trope,
Yeah.
that, great. I'm happy
Well,
for
it
them.
has an audience, clearly. I mean, it's almost a
For
cult
sure.
series in terms of how rabidly some people love
A
it.
lot of
So,
people consider it their like greatest of all time,
yeah.
so which is great, different strokes for different folks, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So anyway, well, but it was lovely chatting with you, Sam, and I am looking forward to watching where you go with your channel.
Hmm.
And I'm sure this time you're going to go way more than 2 years. I'm sure of it. How long has it been, by the way?
We're coming up on a year. It'll be a year in July, I think.
All
So,
right,
yeah.
something to
Yeah.
celebrate. Yeah, are you going to have any kind of a Q&A or any plans for a year celebration?
Not sure. We just hit 1,000 subs like a month or two ago, which was
Okay.
like that was my thing. I was like, you know what? If I can hit 1,000, we'll never check the numbers again, which is not entirely true, but is more true than it was before. So, yeah, I don't know. No plans yet, but I'm really grateful to have made, some good friends here, to have had some really good conversations, even with people, like I mentioned the Baker video earlier, and a lot of people disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But I've had some really great conversations with people about, what they've thought about different books or how they read it differently, and that has been so cool, very cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I appreciate, just to circle back, like I appreciate a lot of what you do. I wouldn't have started a BookTube channel again if it hadn't been for what you do here. And if you don't mind me asking, like you talk to a lot of rinky-dink channels. Like you're not getting any extra subs from talking to me. Do you do it because you just enjoy it, or you feel an obligation to do it, or is it what like what's the reason for all the outreach, even with people who are seemingly so insignificant in terms of the numbers go like or do you
Well,
just find people interesting or what is it?
yeah, no, so no one is insignificant, and I do find people interesting, and I love talking to a variety of people because, like you, I enjoy being in this community and learning from other people and new voices. I don't know. I started a channel back in the very beginning of 2020, even
Hmm.
before we knew the pandemic had hit, really. And when I started, there were a couple people who were very kind to me and just shouted out my channel or invited me into a conversation. People like Iskar Jarek, who's no longer really making videos or anything. Maybe he'll be back someday, but he's a Malazan fan who saw
Hmm.
my first Malazan video and it was very welcoming. And there was a channel, Chris Bookish Cauldron was another one who just shouted out my channel, and there were kind people, as you know, in
Hmm.
this community. And I was profoundly grateful for that. And I decided that it would be an important aspect of what I do here to help out. I can't help as many people, obviously, as I would like to. I mean, there are just so many channels out there. But part of what I do here and the main purpose of this series, DDF, is to help out people and shine a spotlight on some really lovely people
Hmm.
who are, getting started or just a smaller channel. I feel like an undiscovered gem or whatever. That's a big part of it for sure. Yeah. So yeah, and I love talking to a variety of people and learning from them. So it's all of that, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for what you do. It's very
Yeah.
much appreciated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad, and I get a lot out of it. I mean,
Hmm.
I love learning from people. So it's yeah, part of why I'm here. A big part, really.
Hmm.
So yeah. But thank you, Sam, and I will have a link to Sam's channel, iSamwise, in the why is the I there? Is that just sort of like iPhone, I whatever, or
Yeah,
what
is
keeps you with
mainly
that?
ripping off Jordan from iWizard, you know. I just figured I need to copy somebody, so I'll rip him off. Really, I just needed something that had my name in it, so people refer to me by Sam something. So that's where it came from.
Okay, okay, fair enough. All right, good. All right, well, it has been lovely chatting with you, Sam, and
Thanks, Philip.
we'll be chatting again. But everybody, go check out Sam's channel, link in the description, and until next time.